And we're recording. Hello, Brian. Hello, Christian.
Hi, Hayley. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Hayley. Hey, Brian.
Hayley, Christian and I have been friends for a long, long time. And he's a guide for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people around the world. He wrote a book called Coming Out Spiritually, but he has a new book out, which we're going to talk about, which is Awakening the Soul of Power. You see it there. I have mine here. And it's a really good guide to help anybody wherever they are on a journey to see what the hero's journey is about. And he gives you really helpful hints about homework stuff. I was really impressed that it's a workbook besides a thick book. It's a think and do book.
Thank you, Brian. That means so much coming from you as a teacher and a healer and a guide for so many and a scout of consciousness. So thank you for those words.
Well, it's I really like it. I mean, Hayley, you've started it.
I've started reading it, and Christian and I connected a bit ahead of this, and then he sent me the book. And immediately I was just like, this is a powerful book. It has a very intense energy around it, not from the perspective of it's hard, just from the perspective that it's such a high frequency. So I think the whole aspect of think and do is going to be hugely impactful.
Yeah.
Kind of one of those books that people are going to be able to read and then be like, somehow all these other think do books I wasn't able to do. This one I did. Yeah.
It's not, you don't have to be in the spiritual movement.
Mm-mm.
I mean, in fact, it's better that, you're somebody with a curiosity, I think. Well, we should let the author talk about his audience. I mean, Christian.
Well, and I love your take on it, Hayley, being as connected as you are, and the translator that you are. That means a lot that you can.
Thank you for
on its energy.
creating this.
Christian, where does your confidence come from? I mean, one of the things that I was really struck by in the beginning was your confidence that you know who you are, you know what your gifts are, you know what your mission is. Where's that come from?
Such a beautiful question. I don't think I've been asked that before. It comes from doing the journey authentically myself and struggling with hard questions, existential questions at a very young age, which is one of the benefits of having grown up gay, which, because the shadow side of that is that we feel not so much now, but in the days that when we came out, Brian, there's like you felt like you were different, like there was something wrong with you, sometimes like you were the only one. And if we went by what religions told us or psychiatry told us, is like the outlook wasn't really good.
Mm-hmm.
The upside of that was, however, that because we didn't fit into the consensus way of the world, it forced us to come up with our own answers and to struggle with these questions of existential questions. Who am I and what am I here for? And I always had a sense of, like what we would call a vocation. Like I know you and I grew up Catholic, which got translated in different ways at different times. Like in high school, I thought I wanted to be a priest. And I think I did have an authentic vocation and an authentic desire to serve the sacred as I understood it then. And I also think that in those days, I naively thought that priests were celibate. So I think it was a way that I could sublimate my sexuality and not have to deal with it. And so having gone through that process of like really struggling, it was like wrestling with ourselves and with the sacred and wrestling with the angels and like, who am I? And having to find a way for ourselves. It's a powerful process. And for me, it's always been, having always been introverted, I also grew up in Cuba, my first 10 years of life. So I'm really grateful for that, because we had a TV, but there was nothing worth watching. So I grew up reading, and developed a lifelong love affair with words and books. And I think that also triggered that ability or that willingness to dive inside and to explore the inner world, the inner universe.
I think you
You-
raised, you
Go
raised
ahead.
such a good point there about sort of this authentic journey coming from a place of asking the hard questions that lead into the hard experiences. And Brian and I were talking about this too, where it's, the authenticity and being able to teach, being able to write books that teach people and share the journey. You really have to go through those gritty experiences where it's just like, there's nothing else left but just you.
Yeah. And so it's not, for me, it's not, it's like that. I brewed at this book for a long time. In a way, it was a whole lifetime working on it, probably the last 8-10 years. And it's practices and teachings that I live. These are not hypothetical teachings that I picked up in a workshop or something, like stuff that worked for me and I know works, and that I've shared with people in retreats and workshops for decades. So I know they work.
Yeah.
No question that they help us get free.
And I think in that they do carry that different frequency when it comes from something that works for you and you've seen it work for other people. It then has that higher frequency, which I think when you bundle them up into a book, that's how your book now has that much higher frequency.
But as Hayley and I have said many times, the teacher has to authentically manifest what it is she or he is sharing with others. If they don't pick up in us the serenity that they seek in them for themselves, then the messenger is the message. And Hayley, when she and I first got together, she talked about LGBTQ people having a superpower that she felt because of the journeys that we had to face, that we were really confronted with, for me, what does it mean to be a man? When Oliver North said, if gays are allowed in the military, no real man will ever enlist again. Well, am I not a real man? What is faith? Does God love a homosexual? I had to answer that question. What is family? Is it a spouse of the other sex and children? What constitutes family? I mean, those are all basic. And I say, and not for the sake of drama, but when I was 26, I drank the bottle of turpentine. I think that when you really come to the edge, and that you could have died, things get into very clear focus about the choices you're going to make henceforth.
Absolutely. And I would add to those list of fundamental, human, profound, existential questions of identity, I would add marriage to that. And that's one of the ways in which the LGBTQ community has served one of the archetypal roles that I write about in Coming Out Spiritually, which is the scout of consciousness, the person who goes behind that and leaves the safety of the village, of the group, and goes on to see what's on the other side of the river or through the forest around the mountain. So placing themselves at risk for the sake of the group. So our community in many ways has done that. And marriage is one of those ways. It's like, how many of us knew, that up until recently, that marriage for romantic reasons wasn't even a thing until the late 1800s. Like, I didn't know that. And I think and write about this stuff. And so by virtue of some of us, wanting to be included, because initially, I would say the majority of us didn't want part of that institution because it was a patriarchal institution. But by virtue of some of us wanting it forced everybody to look at what is marriage and what is it serve. Is it just about establishing paternity and inheritance rights and possession of man over woman, or is it something else?
And I said, Ray and I got married, I think, and as soon as Canada allowed it, the US didn't allow it yet. So we went up to Canada. But, I said then, we don't need the blessing of the state or the church to tell us that we have love, that we are family. But historically, we wanted to take advantage of it. And it has significance. I mean, once you say the state acknowledges it and it's happening around the world, that changes. When I came out in 1974, homosexuals were monsters. And now we're talked about as raising children, foster parents, long-term relationship. There's been this huge cultural shift in focus and attitude in the last 50 years. But we put the face on it. It didn't happen on its own. Yeah. You had to come out, put the face on it. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask about, you had to fight against, and you make so clear in your book that power came from above you, like the communist state in Cuba, the church and Catholicism, and a Latino Spanish family was the father figure, although your father was a psychiatrist and was less prone to that. But and you didn't see yourself as a tough guy, I mean, when you were in school, were you not picked on for being quiet and
yeah, sure, and
also having a Georgia accent, because your family went to Georgia for some reason? I don't, to get your father accredited, I guess, in the US.
Yeah, exactly. It was one of the few psychiatric hospitals where the Cuban psychiatrists could practice while they were getting licensed here. So I think this lifetime I came to master being the other and feeling different, because in Cuba, once you announced that you requested a visa to leave the country, you were immediately ostracized, and we were called gusanos, like kids.
And that means worm, you said?
Worms, yeah.
Worms.
And including teachers, like they would call you gusanos. It's like, oh my God. And my teacher and my sister and I were like at the top of the class up until that time. And then we never got awards, we never got cookies. And I was an introverted, quiet kid. So I wasn't into the rough sports and the group sports. So I was called sissy. And then, I came to the US and didn't speak a word of English and lived in this small town in the middle of Georgia, which, as you can imagine, didn't take kindly to foreigners. And then finally, after 3 years of learning the language and, perfecting the Southern accent, then we moved to Miami, where I stuck out again because of the Southern accent. But the beauty of that, the blessing of that, is that I'm such an unlikely person to be speaking and writing about what it means to live heroically and about personal empowerment. And so because of that, it's like I was so shy as a teenager. I was a good student. I had a 4.0 in high school, except for 1 B in my last semester. And I didn't do this consciously or intentionally, but looking back on it, I know that I did that subconsciously to sabotage my GPA so that I wouldn't have to get up in front of an auditorium with hundreds and hundreds of people and give a speech. There was no way I could have done that.
And now you're doing it.
And now I speak all over the world. I'm a TEDx speaker. I'm a professional speaker, and that I get paid to speak. So that's one of the ways in which this book is the authenticity of it. It's like I know it works. If I can do it, if I can step into my power, anybody can.
Yeah. Do you find that that's a lot of your drive to kind of say, if I can do this, anybody can do this? A lot of your sort of motivation?
I think yes. I mean, that for sure. But I think maybe that's more of one of my confidence, one of my sources of confidence. I think what drives what I do, what drives everything that I do, really is paraphrasing Einstein, right? That you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. So when I look at the world and the hole that we have collectively dug ourselves into, that we're just now beginning to witness what we have unleashed on the environment, of which COVID is a symptom of our unhealthy relation and imbalanced relationship to nature. and the power over, right? The patriarchal power over relationship to the physical, like it's something to be conquered and subjugated and controlled. So to me, that's one of the benefits in which COVID is the opportunity for us to learn from it, is like, hey, we got to shift this relationship to power and to nature, and to realize that we are nature. Like nature is not something that's outside of us that we go visit. Is like we are it. We are part of it. And so, and that's just one of the challenges, right? Not to mention terrorism and the polarization and all the other stuff, you know, the wealth distribution, et cetera, hunger. So sometimes when I think about all this stuff, it's like, it's overwhelming. And I just say to myself, I'm just gonna go to the beach, eat a lot of dark chocolate and pizza, and have a lot of sex.
I like the dark chocolate part.
And then I, reel myself back and I said, all right, dude, chill out. Chill out. What can I do, right? What can I do personally? And the answer is always continue to wake myself up and to heal myself and to continue to support as many people to do the same. And then I said, all right, that I can do. I will do that. And so that's the driver, I think. It's like, to me, the only way that we're going to get out of this has to be thinking out of the box. It's, in my understanding of it, my language is it's spiritual revolution, an evolution of consciousness, a leap in consciousness.
Yeah.
Your book is Your book is self-published.
This one is. The first one was published by Tarcher Putnam, one of the big New York houses.
Yeah, same with me in terms of my early books for St. Martin's Press, but it's tough to self-publish and get books sold. I mean, you have to promote constantly.
But that's the way for any book, even unless you're like a really big name, like even if you get published by a New York house, you still have to promote.
Right, but they have bookstores automatically pick up books. You can't get a book reviewed if it's self-published, right?
It's harder to.
Yeah.
It's harder to. And so, yeah, I debated this. I went back and forth on this long, and, before I decided to self-publish. And, I love bookstores and will always love bookstores. And these days, it's like, and I hate to admit it, most of my books I buy on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because it's just so convenient.
And
especially in times of COVID. So I'm almost ashamed to say that, because I really love the concept of the bookstore. And when I go to a city, I go visit bookstores. I love my books.
Right.
And when possible, if I'm at the airport, there's a Books and Books has a branch there that I buy books there.
Uh-huh.
But the distribution and the promotion is a different reality. It's a different publishing world these days.
So
especially in pandemic times.
Why would you choose to publish this one, self-publish this one, versus go with the sort of bigger publisher?
Well, I mean, one of the main conversations I had with I'm not going to say his name because he said off the record, but he's a really good friend of mine. He's a brother, one of the heads of an imprint in New York. And he said, look, frankly, off the record, if it were me, I would self-publish. And
he's in the publishing business?
He is like a publisher.
Yeah. I had the same experience.
One of the big houses.
Yeah. I had the same experience with a power couple. One is the writer. Well, Eric Marcus, you know his name from, Is It a Choice? I mean, he's done, and his gay American history stuff, but and his husband, Barney Karpfinger, is an agent. And I talked about, would you set your hair on fire if I self-published? And they said, do it. I mean, it's publishing world has changed so much. But yeah, I find that I published a lot of books on my own, but they sit. I mean, if you don't have a mechanism to to promote, I guess going back to the point of your book with ego is that, so what if they sit? You've written them, you put them out there. It's not about competing with anybody else, right? I mean, I find that the basic message of at least the first half of your book is confronting ego and understanding it. And seeing how it sabotages you.
Yeah, without a doubt. But I don't think that wanting to sell books is coming from ego. Not in your case and not in my case. Like for me,
Yeah.
it's part of the mission. Like for me, that's part of that same mission so how can I support the spiritual revolution? Is like book is like one way. And it's just one way, like, right? And sadly, in our ADD society, most people don't read books. So then what else can I do, right? So then I have to start creating virtual online programming. I have to get on social media, which I don't really enjoy, but if I'm gonna fulfill my mission, then I gotta do that.
I have a question. Hayley, did you want?
I was just going to speak about sort of segueing on Christian's point there, like part of the mission. And I feel like this year, sort of late last year into this year especially, has been this push to be bigger, be more, be better, and, you know, use every possible opportunity to speak, to use your voice, to share your story. And I think it's, you know, the books, however we're doing it, sharing our stories is so important.
Yeah, I'm with you. And so that I think where the ego part comes into this, Brian, for me, what I've had to learn to navigate is to do that without expectation. To just let go of the expectation. If the books is not selling at the rate that I think it should be, let that go, right? Let it go. And I'm just going to do what I do anyway, which is say yes to any speaking opportunity, to get on social media, do whatever I got to do. And trust that output of energy will at some point, you know, return.
Yeah.
Let me, if I can, ask a specific question about judgment. Yeah, in your book, and Hayley and I talk a lot about that. You know, not judging others is a really important step towards spiritual wholeness. It's really hard to do in this divided country, at least the US, speaking about the US, and it's happening all over the world. How do you not judge the people who stormed the Capitol? You know, how do you not judge Donald Trump? I mean, what do you do, Christian, with that?
You know, and that's such a beautiful question too. I mean, judgment is a function of the ego, as you know. So we're going to judge, right? It's part of that. So there are a couple of things to say about that. To remember and realize that as harshly as we're judging others, we're judging ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. And we all know that the ego is that inner critic, that harsh inner judge. The number that we do in ourselves, the things that we say to ourselves are so mean and so cruel, and we would never say to anybody else. So that's part one of learning to stop judging, just cut it out. The other thing that's important to realize that there's a difference between judging and evaluating, right? Because in life we have to evaluate. Is that good for me? Is that not good for me? How do we know the difference? I think it's the charge behind it, right? With an evaluation, we can be more neutral. It feels more objective. With a judgment, there's a charge.
Yeah.
And there's a sense of me making myself better than, superior to, making myself right. And so that's the part we got to really be really careful about. Yeah,
and I think just to add on to that, just like valuation for me feels like balance. You're in the middle. You're neither one way or another way. You're sort of anchored in, I can see what's going on here. How can I be in my highest and best? And I think when you go into that judgment, you're just swinging from one side to the other side.
Exactly.
Almost like the Newtonian balls.
Yeah, I think also the languaging is very different. Like, how do we know who's that voice in our head? Is it the ego or is it the higher self, or soul, whatever you want to call it? Whenever we find ourselves pulling big words, big concepts, complicated ideas in order to build a case to prove why we're right, hands down, ego, right? We don't need to figure that out. The ego went to law school and appoints itself a judge, jury, and prosecutor to prove why it's right and why you're wrong, and sometimes even delivers what the punishment should be for being wrong. The voice
But-
of the higher self is that still quiet voice inside, that's inside every one of us, right? That the holy texts tell us about. And its language is very simple. It's like, yes, do that. I wouldn't go there.
Yeah.
When do we get into trouble is when we override it and we go there anyway, every time.
Mm-hmm.
So part of our task is quieting that monkey mind, that crazy monkey mind of the ego that has something to say about everyone and everything every moment of the day, so that we can access the still quiet voice that's inside every one of us, where all the answers to all our questions lie.
The question that I have related to this is that, as I know is true for the both of you, there are people who are looking for an opinion from me when something happens, right? Or does being spiritual mean that you totally ignore what's happening in the world, right? Because you don't want that to be, I mean, Jesus wasn't that. I mean, he was very clear, about people and spoke up loudly about people misbehavior. So the desire to say something constructive about what is happening, about awful things that are happening, and help people, help yourself and help others find their way through it, so that they react as their higher selves. That's challenging, especially because your own ego wants to be, sarcastic and funny and biting, and exactly what you could say that would put them down, and you have to stop that, because that's not really your calling.
Yeah.
And I think that there's added pressure too there, especially now, because everybody accepts and wants that incendiary comment that feeds what is going on right now. So first, even just have the courage to stop and take a second and be like, right, where am I on this? What do I know enough to be able to provide an opinion? And then, oh my goodness, if I provide my opinion, am I going to be safe?
Yeah. This is impossibly difficult. It's hard. It's nothing short of heroic. And so how do we speak our truth in a way that increases the chances that it's not going to be just immediately denied or attacked? And I think the key to this is compassion, right? Like, we get to speak our truth. We're not talking here about becoming doormats, or we're not talking about spiritual bypassing. It's like, oh yes, everything is love, everything is light. And we don't want to, think about or dive into the shadow stuff, which we have to. There's no way to jump over that stuff if we want to be free, if we want to be healed. I think the key, Brian, as we get into this more deeply, is compassion. Mm-hmm. Like understanding that what's driving those behaviors is fear, right? And what's driving those behaviors are, it's like, we're in the middle of really dramatic times, end of times in a way, but what, not in an apocalyptic way, like we think that it's going to be the end of the world, more in apocalyptic in the sense of lifting the veils, which is the original meaning of that word, apocalypse. And you could say that all these systems that we're looking at that are imploding in front of our eyes, that's really the end of the patriarchy. And so we're in this death rebirth moment, and so no wonder that a lot of people are freaking out. A lot of people, especially men's identities, are being questioned. And as women step more and more into their power over the last few decades, men are having to also question, who am I and what is my role here? And I think a couple of years ago was the last numbers that I got, but I think it was 2 years ago, we're approaching 40%, 40%, I forget right now, of heterosexual households in which women are out earning their heterosexual spouses.
Mhm.
And so much of the identity of a man is the provider, right? So suddenly it's like, wait a minute, if I'm not that, who am I? So the same questions that you and I had to struggle with, like, what does it mean to be a man, is like a lot of men are having to question, especially as their jobs are becoming, exported or taken over by robots and machines. And so it's a really scary time. And during scary times, it's like, it's the normal thing, the human thing, is to hold on to what we think, being told what to do, to the patriarchal structures and clear black and white, and this is the way it is. But what's important to remember too is that this patriarchal system and the system of power that's hierarchical, power over rather than power with, of course, it's been horrible for women, and we've been running really off balance for the last several thousand years in terms of gender and power between genders in this world. Men have also been paying a harsh price for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Harsh, because we walk around thinking like, this is powerful, and this is what it means to be a man, and you can't feel, and little boys don't cry. Like what a prison.
Changing it.
Mm-hmm.
What a prison.
Patterns. You're continuing that same pattern. You're just going from one side to the other. And I was asked, I had a wonderful week with really deep and long conversations. And it was about this question of, specifically, when you have these aggressors and you have one person hurting another person. And I was asked, who are you going to support? And I was like, both of them. I'm going to go over to that person that has been hurt and make sure that they're okay. Is there anything I can do to you? And then I'm going to go to that other person and say, are you okay? Is there anything I can do to you? They may not be willing to listen. They might meet me with some kind of harshness, but their voice deserves to be heard just as much. And I think it's the same with the men. I wrote an article, a blog post, I think in 2018, about the double standards we have. And it was specifically about the Me Too movement, sort of women saying we want all of this power and it's not fair, and they're wanting to start companies. But the men that are funding those companies are the same men that are committing these awful Me Too atrocities. And it's just, we've got to be able to look at this and be like, if we're going to heal this, we have to be in it all together. And to come down to that compassion of, if this person deserves healing, so does this person. And we need the men to be a part of this change. We need to be able to support them, and when they're freaking out, be able to say, hey, it's okay. Here's something that might help, or if you need help, I'm happy to help whenever you're ready for it.
Yeah, if we don't, go ahead, Christian.
That's why I added a chapter in this book about what it means to be a man in the 21st century. Because we're having to redefine those roles of provider, the explorer, the conqueror. I mean, the roles that we have as traditionally associated with the role of a man. So, and their ways, like I talk about each one of those and how to express them in the 21st century. And because we have to. The rate of suicide in this country is 4 times as high among men. So 70% of the suicides in the US are committed by middle-aged white men. And women outlive men in the US by 5 years, worldwide by 7 years. So the system doesn't work, right? The system isn't working for men. And part of the reason for that is because we walk around like this, like unfeeling robots. And so we're paying a price. That energy that we're suppressing, all those emotions have to come out somewhere. What used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy. Now we know from physics, from quantum physics, that everything is energy, including the body, including the emotions. So when we suppress those emotions, they just don't go away. Like we carry them with us, and either we then react inappropriately and release them inappropriately and then cause harm to our relationships, or we start showing up as, they start showing up as physical symptoms, heart attacks, cancer, stomach ulcers. So there's no way around it. We've got to learn, be okay with the emotions, make our peace with them, learn about the emotions, and then learn how to communicate them consciously, courageously, and compassionately.
But there has to be a payoff. If people don't do things because you tell them it's good for them. If that were true, everyone would quit smoking quickly, and but so one is stop making straight white men the enemy. Quit presenting them constantly as the people against whom we're working. And secondly, straight white men need to know that it's worth making the hero's journey, that there's something that they're going to get out of it that's positive for them. Not just the idea of sharing, and not just the idea of the earth. That, that's, you have to be in the right place to relate to those things, right? But there has to be an incentive that they say, I want what he's got.
Exactly.
Right.
Freedom.
I don't want to give up what I've already got.
Right. Why would I give this up?
Yeah. Because it hasn't been working for you. You're miserable. You're not happy. It's a false sense of security. It's like we're settling for morsels of pseudo love. Our relationships aren't working because they can't. If we're approaching it with this power over mentality, eventually the other person is going to react to that and rebel, and then it's going to show up in passive aggressive behavior and the other unhealthy ways of expressing power. So so freedom, and freedom in the ultimate sense of we get to be all of who we are. We don't have to follow some misunderstood definitions of and limiting ways of what it means to be a man. We get to be all of who we are. We get to reclaim all parts of our rejected humanity, whether that's our emotions or our sexuality or spirituality. And so then we get to be whole human beings. We get to be happy. We get to look ourselves in the mirror and sleep peacefully at night. So it's priceless. The rewards are priceless.
Priceless. And I think that goes to such a huge word in terms of hope, because I think a lot of what is the benefit here? There's hope, but also, again, sharing our stories. There are far more people out there that have gone through this transition, have, come back to a much healthier alignment that is in balance and harmony, that are now earning just as much money, having more happiness associated with that money. They're living in those nice big houses, and they're walking in the door going, oh, look at my castle. From a place of not, I need more, but I'm blessed. And I think we need more and more of those stories, which I hope we can do through this platform too, where it's no longer sort of the elusive and exclusive few that can do it. It's more of, we can all do this. And I think it's to your point too, Christian, and I know, Brian, you too. For me as well, if I've done it, you can do it.
Yes, and I was reading through your personal history. It's like you embody that too. Of having it all according to the definition of what we need to have to be happy in the world, and being miserable.
Yeah.
And then giving all that up and really discovering yourself and your power and your purpose, and giving authentic expression to that and being happy.
In my journey, my happiest moments, and they always change, but the one that is really sticking is I, had it all, spent it all on my journey and finding the healers, the teachers, to get my physical, my mental health back up to where it needed to be able to support the journey now. But my happiest moment, and the one where was the switch, was I was on my last apple. And I was having that moment of to my guides, I'm like, you guys know this is the last apple and it's not a big apple. And receiving the client that paid me $180 after that $180 changed my life.
How many apples did that buy?
There, at any point in time, there is 5 apples in my fridge.
I love that. And that experience is priceless. Priceless. I went through a similar experience, and I don't talk about this often, but in my spiritual journey, there was a week where I was homeless. I slept in a car for a week, and would take showers at the YMCA in the morning for $4. And when it got to that place of the last, okay, that's it, nothing else to pawn, money would show up unexpectedly, miraculously, for lack of another word, from unexpected sources. And so through that most difficult experience that I would never want to have to do again, I learned trust. right?
That's, you learned the surrender.
I learned surrender. And it wasn't easy, and it was, I wouldn't want to do it again, but I'm so grateful that I did.
I think it's the hardest times in our life, the most challenging times in our life are really what we remember is, I mean, I know it sounds trite, but it's our most growthful.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's easy to, happiness is, you know, we can say it's fun to be happy. It's not fun to be sick to your stomach in nervousness over something. But boy, the process of going through that terrible storm to the other side is something you'll never forget, and allows you to climb higher up the mountain, as you know, using your metaphor earlier of leaving your group, Christian, to search out for what else is out there.
Yeah, and to go back to your original question, that's where my confidence comes from. I know, when I write about trust, when I write about surrender, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think we are always given what we ask for, because to your point, Brian, in those moments, I was sitting there going having conversations with my guide saying, I don't want this. I don't want to feel like this. I never want to feel like this again. Tell me what I need to do. Do I need to go back to corporate? Do I need to go work at Starbucks? Just tell me what I needed to do. And they were always like, wait. And now, you get through that and you are open now to that opportunity. And now I don't get to feel like that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I got it. And every time there is the fear, if there's a few quiet days where I feel like I haven't had enough clients, I'm like, guys, we're not going back there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's my reminder to be, do you want to feel that anxiety again? Or do you want to be free? It's like, I'm going free.
I so get that, Hayley. And that's one of the ways in which I'm so grateful for this last year of COVID, where, all my income came from retreats. I haven't had a retreat in over a year now. And I got to tell you, not once this year did I have that old voice, which I'm very familiar with, where, even the negotiations, like, we're not gonna go back there again, are we? It's like, I never even doubted it. So it helped me to see how established I am in trust in that level where it comes to money and finances. I didn't waver once. And I do have a few years on you. So I've been working this a little bit longer than you have.
That brings up a question that I wanted to ask you too. In our last conversation, Hayley and I were talking about wisdom. Now, what is wisdom? And is wisdom innate? Is wisdom something that happens only after a lifetime of experiences? How would you define wisdom and its sources?
It's a really good question. I never stopped to think whether it was innate.
Well, we talk about the child, we'll say the child is an old soul, right?
Yeah, I see that. I see that. I just hadn't thought about that. And I can relate to that. I was, even as a child, I would have people come to me for advice. It's like, where did that come from? Mm-hmm. It wasn't that my father, the psychiatrist, taught me anything, because he didn't. Did I pick it up through osmosis? Maybe. I think wisdom comes mostly from experience. And so to go back to the original, the first part of the conversation, it just comes from living life and asking the hard questions and testing things out. So that when we speak, we're not speaking because we read it in a book or because we learned it in a workshop, but we actually lived it. We worked it out ourselves. We learned trust the hard way.
Right. You can have people who are in their 70s who have had lots of life experiences who are not wise.
That's true too.
Why? I mean, so, if experiences, I think experience can be a teacher.
Yeah.
But is it necessarily? You have to look for the lesson.
Yes. So that's it. Yeah, that's right. So that's a nice nuance. It's experience with self-reflection, right? With looking at ourselves and asking the hard questions. we don't get wisdom just from living 60, 70 years.
Mhm.
But if we've had the experience and we've struggled with life, which is difficult and challenging, and it's going to continue throwing curveballs our way, that we can count on. But if we have spent our life like asking the questions and doing the work and looking at ourselves and looking at our triggers and our patterns and why we do the things we do, then that's the work that results in wisdom.
Mhm.
And I think to circle back to sort of the children where we're like, they're old souls. I think wisdom is a collection of the soul's learnings. So it's not just this lifetime. And that's why I think we have sort of these 70-year-olds where you're like, not so wise. You're still so almost immature. And you can have a 2-year-old that's so mature and you're just like, where did you come from?
Mhm.
I think it is that collection of the soul's journey and that process of being open to information, turning information into knowledge, allowing that learning to become now the soul's wisdom. And that's when it becomes an innate thing. And I think a lot of us, what we're starting to, with this leap in consciousness, is be able to tap into that inner wisdom now and allow that inner wisdom to really guide us going forward.
Do you believe in the migration of the soul, Christian?
Do you mean by that reincarnation?
Yes.
Yeah, I do. It makes sense to me. And I've had a couple of experiences that I can't explain otherwise. It just makes sense. And I mean, and you and I know that it was part of the Bible up until the 400s, that the reincarnation was taught up until the 400s, I think it was. That evolution of the soul makes sense to me.
It makes sense to me too. You can't prove it. So many things, people want proof that, there is an afterlife or there is a God or there is, and sometimes, when you and I were little, Christian, it was less likely for Hayley to do this, given what she's told me about her faith background. But when you and I were little, it was God this, God that, Jesus this, Jesus that. But we ran in a group that everyone else was talking about it too. So we didn't sound nuts, right? If you start talking about that as an adult, you become more aware that there are people out there who think you're talking about imaginary people in the sky, right? And they admire you, but they don't agree with your assessment. They think, well, when it's over, it's over. I'm not sure that Ray's not one of these people who believes it's, when it's over, it's over. I don't. But the only proof I can give of angels is my life experiences. And people either accept it or they don't accept it. That what you're, that.
Oh, there's like one of my first spiritual books when I was in high school was, or right after, it was Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Price, who lives down here in South Florida. And some of the stories from kids who have so much information and can provide like specific detailed questions like they would have no other way to know. It's like, how do you explain that? Is that proof?
Yeah.
I actually had, I've had experiences, so I'm a firm believer in past lives, the migration of the soul. And I had an astrologist who was able to look at it from an astrology perspective and match the charts up. So my chart and this person in the past, we had the same astrological chart.
Huh. How interesting is that?
I had no idea either. And she showed it to me and she's like, oh, this is how we know that. This is how she at least is able to sort of give that validation beyond some level of doubt. And honestly, at this point, I was like, that's really interesting and deserves more of a closer look. But then that also leads me to question, this whole thing about like, how can time and space be repeated? And then I just go down an entire quantum minefield.
Wow. So are you saying, just to make sure that I understood, that you had knowledge about, or you were told that you had been so and so in a past life?
I had visions of it. I didn't believe it. I was just like, this is just some level of disassociation and me trying to frame my trauma. And I was working with a healer at the time. She's like, no, Hayley, what you're seeing is you are living that life's trauma and it is impacting you in this life. So we
You were
did.
actually able to figure out that person's astrological chart and then match
So,
yours.
yeah, so I went through this entire therapy process of closing out that life, allowing myself to release that trauma, and allowing sort of myself to move through that resistance now that was blocking me in this lifetime. And then I went and saw an astrologist, and I was like, here's what I've heard, kind of feels real. Is there any way of knowing without sort of, looking at it in black and white? She's like, yeah, we'll just look at your chart. And I was like, what? And so she, by the person's date of birth, their astrological chart, there's a few nuances based on the location and the actual time of birth. Sometimes that's not completely known, but she literally overlays the charts, and they're.
Wow, that's trippy.
It's a trip.
That is trippy. That is, I've never heard that. That is amazing information.
Yeah.
I wonder if I can go back to your book, Christian. One of the things that I'm aware of, and Hayley and I have talked about, we live in an amazing time where we're aware that there are people everywhere who are coming to the same level of consciousness outside of organized religion generally. People who are have on their own made their way, found their truth by looking at different religious traditions, etc. But you pick it up in movie scripts. You use a lot of cultural references, which I really like, because I think the vast majority of people, will relate to Gollum or to the different characters that you make reference to in your books, Christian. But we are really privileged to be living at this time, as difficult as it has been since our childhood, with assassinations and plagues, and to live at this time in which there's this new consciousness that's emerged about being male, about race, about the earth, and to notice how many people out there are having the same experience as we are. Does that, the awakening of the soul of power, it's how to live heroically and set yourself free. That would not have been a bestseller in the 1930s, right? Because people were they were thinking differently. Today, I think people are aware that there is something going on in themselves, that they don't have to be stuck in the same patterns that their parents were. And that there are, people send me manuscripts, and so much of it is similar, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
Hello?
You're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right about that. The amazing times in which we live, and and the internet is part of that, right? It's
Yeah.
like
And social media.
And social media. Like, I don't know if that's what Peter Russell meant when he wrote that book, The Global Brain, whether he was actually thinking about the internet in that way, or whether he was talking about it more from a metaphysical, energetic perspective. But it is the global brain, and information that in old days was all secreted, and you had to go through mystery schools or go off to an ashram in India to learn about, is like, you just got to go online now. And there it is, all of it.
It's
Anything
accessible.
you need to know. Anything you need to know.
Yeah, and I think, sort of circling back to what is the benefit to somebody doing this? Why would they want to do it? I think it is that hope. There is so much hope out there. You just need to look at the statistics around the bestsellers. Most of them about energetic experiences. Look at the TV shows. Most of the big TV shows are about energetic experiences. And they're with characters that are not just the white family. Some of the biggest shows, like if you look at Bridgerton, that's going white and black in a period where that was just, and look how successful it was. So there's an enormous amount of hope. And I don't even think a romantic is the right word. I need to come up with a better word, because I'm just an endless hoper.
Yeah.
Because I do see that we are having some struggles, but I also see what's coming through these struggles. And I am so, like, every day I have either a session with a client or I speak with somebody who just wants to know my story. And they're so excited about the future. They're so willing to do the work. And I'm just sitting there going, like, this is amazing. There is hope, and it's going to be much quicker than we think.
Yeah, and let's add to the mix the return of the sacred feminine, the rise of the sacred feminine, because to me that is the most important thing that needs to happen in the world. That's why this book has such a particular message, a specific message about the empowerment of women. And it's not to idealize women, it's not to put women up in a pedestal, it's not to demonize men. Women are also capable of abusing power, but it's because the world has been running so off kilter, so off balance. And if we expect for that to take place in the world, that balance between the masculine and the feminine energies, it has to start within. It's got to start within each one of us. And I'm convinced, like, when women are in 50% of power in this world, we're going to have a very different relationship to war and poverty and hunger and to all of it, all of it. And so when I think about it strategically, like, what is one thing that I can focus on that's then going to ripple out? That's what I land on. And that's why I keep harping on that.
And similar to you, I harp on that everybody has the divine feminine, whether you're a woman or a man. Half of your being is divine feminine, half is divine masculine.
I think that's why gay men who embrace their feminine, I'm not talking about embrace effeminacy, I'm talking about embrace the gifts, the gifts that come from the feminine, to embrace it and not feel, in so many cultures, Latin included, there's this emphasis on machismo that makes it very hard for men to embrace their feminine. And Christian, I agree with you about that. When the world affirms the feminine in women, and women become more decision makers, that there's going to be a shift. But there'll also be a shift simultaneously when men embrace their feminine, gay or straight. But I think gay men have the inside track on it, because we were rejected often by others for being soft. They picked it up.
Yeah, I think that's one of the gifts of the LGBT communities. Like, we do have a bit of a head start in that, because we stand outside of society for the most part, of society's definitions and rules about what's masculine and what's feminine. I mean, we both know many, many men who are stuck in traditional limiting ways of what it means to be a man, and women as well.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about it, misogyny and homophobia, two sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to use your example, Brian, about the machismo cultures. In Cuba, and I don't know what the words are in other Spanish-speaking countries, but in Cuba, you have two words for queer or for fag. One is maricón, which is a bad thing and it's negative and you don't want to be that. And then it's bugarrón, which is not so bad. And bugarrón is it's the insertive role, right? So it's got that double twist about, that's not so bad because you're not giving up the superior male status.
Right.
And even if we look at the biblical, the text of terror, one of those 6 holy texts of terror that are used to and misinterpreted to condemn homosexuality, the one, I forget which one it is, I think it's Romans something or other, but it's the one that says you should not lie with a man as you do with a woman. Like
Romans 1:26.
There it is. That's it. They don't say a word about women, right? Because women, they didn't care what women did. Women weren't even human. They were property.
Well, they were watching the woman.
Yeah, right. But even today, right? Even today, with when you talk heterosexual men, you talk about two women, it's like, ooh, I want to see that. I want to get in on that. Two men, yuck, you gotta kill it, or it grosses you out.
Yeah.
What's up with that? Right? What is up with that? And to me, it's because two women together in our current power structure, two women together are not a threat to the power structure.
There's
Two
no
men-
penis involved.
Right. Two
There's
men
no-
are.
Yeah.
Two men, one of them is supposedly giving up the superior male status. And that is threatening to the status quo.
It's an interesting.
And the whole transgender thing too. I mean, so much emphasis in the past has been that in order to be truly transgender, one needed to realign completely so that your body totally reflected the sex that you identify with. And a lot of younger people are saying, I'm not going to be threatened into having surgery that's unnecessary for me to claim my nature, right? That I can identify as male, and still, have my vulva, my vagina. I really admire that, and I think it's the cusp of something new for all of us.
Yeah, I think it's connected to what we're talking about, right? There's consciousness in that, and they're having the courage to do that and to rethink and redefine gender. Is like we all get to do the same.
Yeah.
And what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, what's the feminine energy like, what's the masculine energy like, and then ideally we all get to choose, how we relate to those energies and how we express them.
It's a hero's journey. I mean, we had Stephanie Badalano on recently, a couple weeks ago. She wrote the glass ceiling, reflections from both sides of the glass ceiling, and reading her book about how do you get to the point in your life where you say, I'm going to start living as a woman, the courage that's involved in that. We have a lot of examples of heroes' journeys to point to today.
Yeah,
I think on race, people fighting against both sides. An interracial couple often has to fight both sides in order to create their peace, because the Black family didn't want the child marrying a white person, a white family didn't want. So then we'll have to let go of both families in order to create our own. And there's a lot of that going on, and it's transforming the world. And Hayley, going back to your point about hope, the three of us take great hope from it, but it creates fear. And a lot of people, that 71 million, or that was it 71 million voted for Trump, 74, whatever. There's fear involved in all this change.
and I think that is the inspiration for all of us to step into the light, to speak, to get our books out, and take every opportunity we can to be that neutral voice of balance and harmony, to shine light on that hope and let others just get a glimmer of the hope.
Do you have people in your workshops, Christian, that surprise you in terms of their politics, or, I mean, who's your typical participant?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't always delve into that, but I can tell you that I had a really gut-wrenching conversation with a young, I would say early 40s woman, white, beautiful, professional, successful. And then through, this is back 4 years ago, she, started out being very outspoken for Trump. And then she was flying through Florida, through Miami. So we ended up having lunch. And ironically, she was on her way to work. She's a Christian woman. She was on her way to Haiti to do some volunteer work at an orphanage. Mm-hmm. And so, I really approached it with my heart in my hand. It's like, help me understand, right? Because I know how you feel about the role of women. I know how open you are on LGBT issues. How can you be going to work with orphans, and then there's, you know, thousands of kids in prisons, in internment camps on the other side of the border? How can you explain that? How can you support something? It's not about political party, but it's not even about political party from my perspective. How can you support someone who treats women as if they were less than, as if they have the entitlement to grab them wherever they want to, because he has money, because he's famous? How can you support that? Is that how you want your daughters to grow up, or your sons? And, you know, we just went around it and around it. She ended up in tears, and because she couldn't explain it. If I had to land on why, you know, the pocketbook. The pocketbook.
And Ray goes crazy because he says Democrats have been much better, you know, on the pocketbook than Republicans have, but that's another subject.
That's another subject. And we're actually over time, guys. I know that we could seriously talk and talk and talk.
I know, we could talk for hours, and I hope that one day we will in person.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Christian. And
I love you, Christian.
Links to the book with this YouTube video, so everybody knows where to find you, where to find the book. And thank you very much for your time today. It's been a blessing.
Yeah.
And thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Hayley. I love you both.
Lots of love.
Thank you so much for having me. And Hayley, though we haven't met yet, I can say that I love you too.
Oh, I love you too. Huge love. Bye, you all.
Bye.